A boy's best friend is his mother. This quote from the fictional character of Norman Bates in Hitchcock's Psycho is creepy enough on its own, but the worst part is that there's a real-life psycho who was not only obsessed with his mother, but harvested body parts off of corpses to bring her back to life. Today, I'm going to tell you about Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. My name is Laura. I'm here with my two best friends, Colby and Marina, and this is Grim.
I'm sorry, I need to say right off the rip that it took everything in my being to be quiet while you just said that, because my body was like, what?
Oh my God. Did you see our faces
Yes,
when
I
you
did.
said that he reconstructed his mother?
I am like,
I really like the word harvested.
yeah, that really paints a word picture. Really paints a word
We'll
picture.
just get that out of the way now. Just like if things like that bother you, this is not the episode for you. This may be a bit graphic.
It inspired me in the darkest way.
We were talking about cooking, but
We were.
all right. So episode 3, we're here. It's Monday, Murder Monday.
Murder Monday. Or
it's
Grim Monday,
Grim
as our
Monday.
producer keeps trying to make it.
I like it. Fetch is not going to happen.
That's what I'm saying. Stop trying to make fetch a thing.
Hashtag Murder Mondays.
I like it. I like it all. It's good. It gets me through the weekend. Just kidding. Nobody ever said they were looking forward to Monday until they started recording.
I
a
don't get the
podcast.
Sunday scaries anymore.
No, seriously.
I get like the Monday. I can't come up with something.
Monday manic Monday. That's a song, right?
another
Yeah,
manic
right.
Monday.
Okay.
Unfortunately for our gremlins, they don't get it till Tuesday.
Yeah.
So it's like hashtag terrific Tuesday.
Terrible.
Terrible?
Terrible Tuesday. Terrific. I think
Terrible
originally.
Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay.
Terrifically terrifying, terrible Tuesday.
I can't type all that. You know when you have to do a hashtag, you have to spell things correctly. Like the autocorrect doesn't help you out. It's really awful. So we'll stick with Murder Mondays and TBD Tuesdays.
Hashtag TBD Tuesdays. Can we talk about our gremlins though? Because they're like literally
Yes,
the best.
I'm
So-
cheering as if they can see us. But thank you so much for the interest. It's so exciting.
Yes, thanks everybody for all your support and your love and all your feedback that you've given
Yes.
us. Like, please keep it coming. If there's anything you like, you don't like, anything you want to see on the show, any specific cases, like hit us up on Instagram, or you can reach out to our email. Laura will share some of those details later on in the episode, and we'll post it in the show notes if that helps. But thank you guys. Like, we are just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And you guys have no idea like how nerdy we are. We literally share and talk amongst ourselves about every 5-star rating and every like and every comment and every share and
Yep.
every single thing that anybody has said about us ever. We share it amongst each
Very
other,
exciting.
and it really brightens our days until we can get to record and release the next episode. So
On
thank
Murder
you.
Monday.
I
Murder
am
Monday.
literally looking at the analytics that
Yes.
this website gives us, and we have international listeners. So shout out to our Vietnam listener.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Oh, we've been waiting for that.
We also have a couple Canadian listeners,
That's so
Hey,
fascinating.
Canada.
Okay.
and we lost
job.
those listeners just now.
I'm so sorry. Please keep listening to us. We love you.
You want
We
us to
love
talk
you.
about murder now?
Yes.
Let's talk about murder.
That was great.
I want to hear about harvesting body parts
Yeah.
to recreate a mother.
Yeah,
I'm ready.
Yeah, that's today's episode. So today, if you hadn't figured out, is a little. Well, you may not have figured it out yet because I haven't told you. But we did the past 2 episodes kind of more local, so this is going a little more national. And I was surprised that I had never heard of this, or at least these details, given my love of horror movies. So it should be interesting. So I'm going to start with painting a scene for you.
Paint me a word picture.
I thought you were going to say paint me like one of your French girls.
That too.
Yeah. All right. Maybe later. All right. So it's Saturday, November 16th in 1957. It's Plainfield, Wisconsin. It's cold and wet, as is typically the case in Wisconsin at this time of year. There's already snow on the ground. The locals are used to it, and it's the first day of deer hunting season. So they're all excited, getting ready to go out. Ed Gein is a 51-year-old bachelor. He's eating breakfast, and around 8 a.m., he takes his maroon 1949 Ford sedan into town. He fills up on gas. He goes to the local hardware store, Warden's, where 58-year-old owner Bernice Warden is alone. Bernice had owned Warden's hardware and implement store since her husband had died in 1931, and she took it over. She was well regarded as a business owner, which was pretty cool because this was back in the 50s. So this was not typical of for women to own a business like this, and she was in fact the first woman to be honored on the front page of the local newspaper. She spent her free time fishing. Her son, Frank, often helped her in the store, but today, like most of the town, he was out deer hunting. Ed asks for some antifreeze, which Bernice gives him. He pays for it, she writes up a receipt, and he brings it out to his car. And she's kind of glad to see him go because he is kind of weird. He has a growth on his left eyelid that makes it kind of droopy. He's constantly asking her out, hanging around, so he had gone back out to his car to put the antifreeze out there, and he comes back in with his .22 rifle, wanting to trade it for one she had on sale. He asks to see the one on sale. She lets him, and then she turns to look out the window. Meanwhile, Bernard Merchinski, who owned the gas station across the street, is watching the world pass by, because that's what you do in Plainfield, Wisconsin. He had seen Bernice moving about the store that morning around 8:15. Later, closer to 9, he saw the Warden's hardware truck leave. He thought he saw the driver as a man, which would not be that weird because they often had Frank, Bernice's son, or other help. Not that weird. Mm-hmm. Driving back to his house, Ed passes an acquaintance who's named Elmo, which I just need to pause. And it's just, you just kind of picture Elmo's deer hunting in his little hat, and he's, I don't know.
I pictured a fuzzy red laughing Sesame Street character.
You do have kids, so that would be where you go straight
Wasn't picturing cute little hunter in a hat.
I don't know. I guess because I know he's a hunter. Anyway, so speaking of him being a hunter, he had been shooting deer on Ed's land that morning, and he knew that Ed gets mad when people hunt on his land. So after some pondering, he was driving the other way. He's like, well, I should probably go talk to Ed. So he turns around, drives to the farm to talk to Ed. And as an aside, he thinks it's kind of weird that Ed was driving so fast because he kind of takes everything really slow. So he's like, that's weird. But he's not thinking too hard about it. He's thinking about deer. So Elmo shows up, and Ed is taking the snow tires off of his car and putting normal tires on, which it's Wisconsin in November, which is the beginning of winter. So a little strange, but it doesn't, Ed doesn't think, or Elmo doesn't think too much about it. Ed couldn't care less about Elmo hunting, no big deal, so Elmo leaves. Later in the day, Ed's neighbor Bill stops by to say his car wouldn't start and he needed a ride to town. Ed, covered in blood, says, okay. Bill isn't fazed by this. You may be.
Deer hunting season.
It's deer hunting season.
Yeah, you really tee that up with the hunting. So, I still think I would be disturbed even if I knew that people were hunting to see people covered in blood. But
it's fair, but Ed says, no big deal. I'll go wash off. We'll go into town.
I feel like it's probably normal for a place like that because I have friends who live in Minnesota and they do a lot of hunting and ice fishing, and there's just a lot of things that they would think is normal that we don't really do here.
We'd probably call 911.
Yes. Oh gosh, yeah.
Yes. Not the case here. He's just like, all right, I need a ride to town. No big deal. Wash off, bring you in. As a thank you, they invite him to dinner. Very nice.
That's nice.
Very nice. Back in town, Bernice's son, Frank, returns from deer hunting. He stops by Bernard's gas station, which is where people bring their deer to, weigh them and all that. And the guys stop by and talk about the deer and all that. So they're there talking about deer. Bernard mentions
around the water cooler moment.
They measure their deer. Yeah. They compare the size of their deers.
How big's your deer? So he, having a conversation, and Bernard just mentions that he saw the hardware truck leave. So I'm guessing he probably was like, well, that's weird. Frank's here, not in the hardware truck. But again, they have hired help, not that crazy. But the store had been empty the rest of the day and the lights had been on. And again, this is in 1957. So, I think we don't worry about leaving electricity on as much as people probably did then. So Frank is immediately concerned with this. As far as he knew, his mother was going to leave, be in the store all day. So he goes all the way home to get a key and goes over to the store. In the store, he sees the cash register missing. He sees the floor covered in blood, including a trail leading to the back door. The hardware truck is gone. He calls the police, looking around while they arrive, and when they get there, Frank says, he's done something to her. And they say, who? And he says, Eddie Gein.
Oh, wow. So they called him out right from the
Yeah.
start.
So let me tell you a little bit about Ed before we continue back on that story. So Edward Theodore Gein was born to George and Augusta in La Crosse, Washington. I keep saying Washington, it's Wisconsin. So if you hear me say Washington at all in this podcast, I'm talking about Wisconsin. I'm sorry, Wisconsin.
Unless,
You have great
unless you
cheese.
mean Washington.
I won't in any at all. Nope, it's just cheese, Wisconsin.
Okay.
Okay.
Cheese.
So it's this La Crosse, Wisconsin. I almost did it again. Is kind of like a city. It's on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota. George, Ed's father, had a rough childhood. He was orphaned at 3 years old when his mother and father and his older sister, who left him at home, by the way, when he was 3.
He was 3?
Yes.
I can assure you that 3-year-olds cannot watch themselves.
Yeah. Well, that seemed to be the least of his problems because they all drowned when their wagon was caught in a flash flood in the Mississippi River. That was why they left him home, because it was crazy out. And
Wait,
they all
what kind
died.
of wagon? What year was
Fording
this?
the Oregon Trail?
But that's
so-
what I'm thinking. Like,
So funny enough. So I'm doing. So this is why I had a
did they
timeline
die?
page.
Did they die of dysentery?
Do you know? I
actually
always spelled-
cholera.
I always pronounced that dysentery until I heard somebody say it out loud. So anyway.
Wait, so what year did they drown in their wagon?
So that was, let's see, George was born in 1873, so 1870. So that's what's crazy about this.
Like a legit wagon.
Ed is doing all these crimes in 1957, which is like a time which we don't know well, obviously, but it's like not that far from
It was
now.
back in the day,
Yeah,
which was a
it
Wednesday.
any Dane Cook fans out there, I hope. Otherwise, that's confusing.
Just us, guys.
Yeah.
That's all. It's just the
I
three
will
of us.
hold on to that forever. But it's crazy because so George and Augusta were married in 1899, and they're his parents, and he was doing all this in 1957.
And
I
they
don't know.
drown
just
in
like-
a wagon. It just
Yeah.
seems like there's a disconnect in there
It-
for me.
it is.
Like to follow your
I thought
timeline
the
and
same
story.
thing. Well, and you're also out in the fields of Wisconsin. So I'll get to it, but even the house that they lived in had no, that Ed and his family lived in, had no electricity or plumbing.
So they were probably using wagons far longer than we in
Yes.
New England, where we switched to the Model T and
Guys,
horseback. I don't know.
I'm embarrassed to say that I just now realized you meant a wagon with horses. I was thinking like a Ford Model T kind of a thing.
Actually, that probably would have made
mean-
more sense until she said 1870, and then I was like, okay, like the covered
I mean,
wagon
they
is
didn't
actually probably
specify,
right.
When-
so it could have been a Subaru.
When did cars? Like,
Sorry, what was that? When did
that was
cars?
intentional. Yeah. When did cars? I don't know.
Okay, so
So in a wagon, TBD. What who knows what kind? We
we
don't know.
digress, but the moral of the story is they drowned
They did
in a wagon.
Yeah. So he didn't. And he ended up going. This is again Ed's father. He ended up going to live with his mother's parents on a nearby farm. And not a lot of details here, but it was not a household of love. It was a rough time. Augusta came from a large family of German ancestry, extremely strict, very devoutly Lutheran, and Augusta had a lot of family. She had about, I think, different reports, but about 6 siblings. So Augusta and George met when George was 24 and Augusta was 19. And as I said, they were married in 1899. George was an abusive alcoholic, which is unfortunately was probably pretty common from everything I've read. But he was weak. Augusta ran the household. Like she definitely ran the household, did not respect George at all, didn't even seem to love her husband other than to produce children, which they did. So they had Ed's older brother, Henry, a few years after they married in 1902. And then Ed was born on August 27th, 1906, which again was like kind of breaking my brain that all this was happening in the 1950s. And then there's things that happened up until like 1984. And it's just, I don't know, that broke my brain that it was that far behind.
That the
far
same
back.
story includes
Yes.
covered wagons and like 1950s
It's a trip.
Yes.
murder.
Yeah, listen, I told you we were going on an adventure today.
We're on a journey.
Yes, I realize I don't really need my pen in my hand. I'm not sure. I'm not taking more notes.
What do I do with my hands?
Yeah. Well, I realized you're going to hear it, so all right. So George and, as I said, Ed was born August 27th, 1906. And during this time, when the kids were young, George had worked a bunch of odd jobs. So he was a blacksmith, he was selling insurance, carpentry, tannery, just odd jobs because he was an alcoholic and was not able to actually hold down a job. In 1909, he opened a meat and grocery shop. And interestingly, Ed's earliest memory of his mother was at this shop in the back where he was forbidden to go, and he witnesses his mother gutting a pig. And there's some reports, I have a feeling they're embellished, that he like associated that with arousal, but there's really, we'll get into it. There's nothing, that's not the direction this is going. So that's unlikely, but there's still something with his mother and the blood and the pig, and that's his earliest memory.
So here's the thing though, I'm thinking like, okay, that could really screw up a kid to see something that like traumatizing, but there's plenty of people who grow up on farms who slaughter chickens and who, you know, take care of the animals and prepare them to eat, and they do not turn into serial killers. So I think there still has to be some sort of like predisposition for it to do something to you.
Interesting you say that, because they were on a farm, and so it's interesting that that's the memory he calls out versus like seeing it, you know, a chicken or something like that.
Yeah.
Weird. Interesting. Well, like everything else for poor George, this store failed. And there's lots of, I didn't write down all the details, but Augusta just berates him for this. It's like, you're another failure. It's just terrible. And she says, we're moving. So remember, they were on this, the city on the border of Minnesota. They move a little further east to Plainfield in 1914. So Ed's 8, and they moved to a 195 acre farm, which is huge. I was like, oh, I should put in perspective what 195 acres is. It's huge. It's a lot of land. Very isolated, lots of farmland. Their closest neighbor is a quarter mile away. And there's
so no one can hear you scream.
Quite literally, yes. Very isolated. And Plainfield itself only has 900 people, the town. Oh, wow. So, and
Southington High has more than that. Yeah. So just to put that in perspective.
To be fair, I did grow up in a town that had, I think at the time, I'm sure my dad will be listening to this being like, that's not true. Like 1,100 people. So I had a pretty small town.
I think Southington High is like 2,000 students. My graduating class was like 550. So I don't understand how you live in a town that small.
Yeah.
I thought my town was small. It was like 10,000, the town that I grew up in. Our graduating class was 200, and it was a regional high school.
Yeah, ours was also regional. 6 towns went, and I had a graduating class of like 500 or 600. Yeah.
Wow.
So almost 200 acres, which has nothing to do with the size of our graduating class. But if I come back from that, like I grew up on 24 acres. So it's like that amplified and like
8 times as much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're impressed with my math. I know.
Math is hard.
I know.
Math
but
is hard.
It's a lot. It's very, and it's also like there's farmlands and woods. It's very isolated. They're not near quote unquote town either. I mean, town is not much, but they're 6 miles from that. So it's very, very isolated. They made no money on this farm. I don't actually know how they kept it open at all or running, but they had done nothing. So this is where I said they have no electricity or plumbing, because that was, I think, the norm. I should have done the research, but that was the norm back in the early 1900s, but they just never came out of that. I was surprised to read that Ed did go to school. I assumed this was going to be like he lives all isolated and never leaves, but he did go to school. Was a pretty average student, but definitely weird. He's got, remember that droopy eye. Can't trust those. So he loved reading, was an avid reader, didn't have many friends. Kids will make fun of anything, but particularly a growth on your eye. That's easy to make fun of. He was also really effeminate, very small, very like weak. So he was just picked on. In the rare event that he was able to make a friend, his mother would not have it. She would tell him all the sins. So she was devoutly, like obsessively religious. And every time he would try to bring a friend home or talk about it, she would talk about how that family was full of sin and forbid him to talk to anybody. So this kid is isolated.
I was going to say, she is intentionally keeping him even more isolated.
Yes.
So he doesn't really even have a chance to develop any kind of normal social skill.
Exactly. And he's got no role model in his father, because his father is just like existing barely. And his brother, I read, was a little more independent, a little bit, but he was still under the thumb of Augusta, and she just ran the household. And if you imagine, this is all they knew their whole life. They're not, I mean, aside from going to school, which probably wasn't getting them much, they just don't have much exposure. So everything they knew was Augusta. Henry, the older brother, pushed back against that a bit, but Ed was in love with his mother. He just really, anything that she said was the word, and he would follow everything she said.
I want to feel bad for him, but I know how this story ends, so I don't.
You might be surprised. So you will know how the story, like you have an idea, obviously, in my intro, but you'd be surprised how you feel. It's not, you may not feel as enraged as some of the last ones that we've read through. So, you know, most of Ed's childhood was spent on this farm. He's working on the farm. He did a lot there, but as I said, his father was just becoming a worse and worse alcoholic. So he basically was super abusive, but when he would, hit Augusta or anything, she would cower and then like just out loud wish for his death. So you imagine these kids sitting, listening to that. It's just a terrible situation, but the father is not contributing at all. He's not working. He's just terrible. So he died in 1940 from heart failure, and they were just like, good riddance. Like they
Not to be grim about it, but goodbye.
They were honestly happy, and Ed in particular really wanted to spend more time with his mother. So anyone that's out of the way, the more time he gets his mother to himself, the better.
Healthy. That's healthy.
Yeah. A boy's best friend is his mother, you know. So May 16th, 1945, Henry and Ed, also known as Head,
You shipped them.
were adults at this point. So Ed is 39, Henry's 40, which is also kind of weird. Like they just never met anyone. They never left. They're just living kind of as if they were kids, working on the farm. Augusta's still running the household. But they're out on their field. They were fighting a fire that had started on their marshland, which I also thought was interesting because May, I don't know much about Wisconsin, but like around here, May is not dry. It's later in the summer that's dry. So
You said fire on their marshland as well, so it sounds like it would be an inconsistent situation.
And so there is some disagreement on how the fire started. So some say it was accidental. Some say it was deliberate to like burn up dry grass, which seems very irresponsible to me.
I think that's a thing,
It is
though.
a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it it helps give nutrients to the soil to replant fields and
I
stuff.
want to say that's a fact.
Yeah.
It feels like a fact.
Like we learned
If
that
it's not a fact, I'm making it up, but it's a fact now.
we're soon going to be people are going to learn that grim facts are just lies.
Some of them are actually like just devastating facts, and then the rest are lies.
I would say most of them are real, but
Yeah, so this one we don't know. There was a fire, they're out fighting it. Ed, of course, says this is Henry's idea, but all the newspapers that report on this say it was Ed. Who knows? Either way, Ed says, however it started, there was a strong wind and the fire got out of control. He lost sight of his brother and ended up running for help, which also seemed weird to me because I'm trying to picture this on this 195-acre farm. Who knows where? You could be right near the road, but they don't have electricity or plumbing. I presume they didn't have a phone, although you can run a phone, right, without electricity. I don't know. I'm guessing they didn't have a phone. You're laughing, but I think you can.
I think one of the old school ones that are plugged into the wall.
I think
which is
but
what
it just broke my brain, like picturing a telephone wire being run across like 190 acres of land.
Well, I didn't mean they brought it out to the marshland.
I know, but just my brain broke.
So, but trying to think about this, I'm like, all right, well, they're not near anybody. Maybe they ran to the neighbors, but
he went to get a bucket of water.
Yeah, literally, Lassie, go tell the neighbors. But then they had to go somehow tell the firefighters who presumably were in town. I don't know. It just seems weird, but
seems like a lot of work.
Yeah. So regardless, I just would have thought it would have burnt down the whole land. I don't know. But either way, when Ed finally did bring help, the weird thing was he brought them straight to Henry's body. So he had lost him and then he ran for help and then he brings help back and he brings him straight to Henry's body, who had clothes that weren't burnt, who had a body that wasn't burnt, and who had some weird bruises on his head.
Okay, because I was initially thinking maybe he brought them to where he last saw Henry when he lost sight of him, and maybe that's exactly where he landed.
It's possible.
But if he's not burnt, I mean...
Yeah. So they do investigate, the coroner investigates, but determines that the cause of death was asphyxiation. So
asphyxiation like from strangling or like smoke inhalation?
No, I think smoke inhalation. Yeah. And because he said it was not foul play, so I assume it's not strangling.
Even though none of his clothes were damaged at all. Okay.
So,
and his body.
I mean, this is also like in the middle of nowhere. I think, you know, this family is very isolated. It's not like people were like best friends with Henry. What happened to Henry? I think it just was an unfortunate, like, people didn't care, weren't going to look too far into it. You know, Augusta wasn't saying anything. Ed wasn't saying anything. So I think they kind of just let it go. I mean, it was definitely said that it was a little weird, but they let it go at that.
They wanted to get back to measuring their deer in front of the gas station.
Yeah,
so
seriously,
case
I think it
closed.
was just kind of like
Case
it happened.
closed.
It happened. So at this point, so now it's just Augusta and Ed, and they're
Oh, that's creepy. They're a match made
they
in
are
heaven.
just pigs and shit. Like, they are thrilled with each other. They're spending all their time together. But shortly after, unclear exactly when, but I think later that year or early the next year, which is 1945, Augusta has a stroke. She does survive, and Ed nurses her. Like, he is at her bedside. He's reading her all these psalms and all sorts of things, and just very much taking care of her. But she, in the winter of 1945, has a second stroke and dies on December 29th. So this, as you can imagine, is traumatic for Ed. However, he didn't change much. So from the outside perspective. So again, he's super isolated. He was working kind of as a handyman. That was how he got money. And he, you know, he doesn't do anything. He sells all the animals. He doesn't want anything to do with the farming, and just does some handiwork, but pretty much just continues to keep to himself, and still weird, and still kind of like, they say we'll post the pictures on the Instagram, but he like would always have this like half grin, kind of not smirk, but just like, you know, combined with the eye. I don't know. He's just, but that's who he was, and that continued. So like I said, he stopped taking care of the house, you know, didn't take care of the lawn, anything, let it overgrow. But by the early 1950s, he had spent more and more time at home. And the closest thing he had to a friend was actually his teenage neighbor. So this is like in the 50s. So he's, you know, around 50 years old. And his best friend is a teenage guy. It's not that kind of creepy. It's like, you think about, he just never developed mentally.
I was going to say, it's like
Yeah.
stunted emotional growth kind of friendship.
Yeah.
Like,
And
he was on the level of a 15-year-old.
And again, friend loosely, like, he was not spending a bunch of time. It's just like, he would do, you know, that family would hire him for handiwork and all that. Other than that, he would occasionally go into town to Mary Hogan's tavern, but not because he drank, because mother would not like that. But Mary reminded him of his mother, and that gave him some comfort. Unfortunately, this would have to come to an end when Mary mysteriously disappears on December 8th, 1954.
Oh, does she now?
Yep.
Wonder where she turns up.
Yeah, very little is known about Mary's death. The story goes that a local farmer goes into the tavern. It's quiet and empty, and then he sees a pool of blood, and of course calls the police. The police arrive and see a .32 caliber cartridge on the floor next to the blood, and there's a streak of blood, as if something, perhaps a body, has been pulled through it to the outside where it stops, presumably to be put into a car or some kind of vehicle. However, I mean, they really investigated this, and they couldn't figure it out. Her death remained a mystery.
It does sound like the start of a bad joke, though. A farmer walks into a tavern.
Yeah.
Sees a pool of blood. How's the rest of that
Well,
going?
it also sounds a little bit like how we opened the episode. So I'm curious if we're going to circle on that.
Circle back. Yep. So speaking of circling back, let's come back to the night of November 16th, 1957, which is what I started telling you about, when Frank Worden and the police are trying to piece together what happened to to Frank's mother, Bernice. So they're looking around the store. The cash register is missing, and Frank finds the receipt for the antifreeze that Bernice sold to Ed. This is enough for the police to say, let's go find Ed and see what's happening. So they go to the Gein farm, but no one appears to be home, which I'm curious how they thought that, because the lights are always off if there's no electricity. But, you know, they decide nobody's home. So they think the only other place really that he goes is to his neighbors. And that's where they find him, because he's having dinner, having brought Bob to town and brought him back. He's having dinner. He was actually going to bring Bob back to town to quote unquote see the spectacle because someone had told the family about, word had gotten around. So they had heard about Bernice's disappearance. They assume it's a murder, but at this point they know nothing. And so the police are like, Ed, what'd you do today? What's going on? And he talks through the day. Obviously nothing suspicious comes out of that other than he had gone to the hardware store, and they ask him again and he tells a slightly different story. And when they're like, that's not what you told us, he goes, somebody framed me. And they're like,
what?
framed you for what?
Well, that story fell apart very quickly.
Yeah. Now he did know about there having been something happen, something had happened because somebody had come and told them while they were having dinner, but still they're just like, yep, you're coming with us. So they take him into custody. Meanwhile, the other police, I don't know how many there are others, and they go to search Ed's farm, and it's dark at this point, it's evening. And Ed's house, remember, has no electricity. So they begin with their little flashlights to enter what they call the summer kitchen. I had not heard that phrase. It's really it's like a shed adjacent to the house. I'm assuming it just doesn't have insulation or something. I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't research it, but
That was deep.
Yeah, you're welcome. Go get that tattooed. So they shine their flashlights all around, and they see something hanging from one of the beams.
Oh no.
Given it's deer season, they're like, oh,
it's the trophy.
it's got to be a deer.
Oh no, it is the trophy.
And then they notice it has no head, and they look more closely and see that it is human.
Oh no.
If it's not been graphic already, this is just your warning. If you are not into listening to graphic depictions of body parts and things, maybe skip ahead to the next episode, because that's basically the rest of this.
I don't know that you're going to find comfort in the next episode, honestly, knowing what that case is going to be. So maybe skip to 5 and 6.
What the next one is. Okay,
You're gonna find out
maybe
later.
just don't listen. Oh wait, no, that's bad. For
No,
us.
keep listening to us. Just turn us down for 5 minutes.
Okay, so the police are in with their flashlights and they see Bernice Warden's decapitated body hanging from the rafters.
Oh boy.
A wooden crossbar has been put through her ankles. Oh. Ropes are holding her arms apart, and she had been gutted like an animal.
This is the most horrific picture.
Yep. There's a burlap sack nearby. They open this and
No.
It's her head.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was going to be entrails.
Oh, those were in a box, a cardboard box.
What's in the box? What's in the box? Wow.
Yep. So understandably, they all just stumble outside and throw up.
So the level of PTSD those officers now have in that
and they're
small
not,
town.
They're not even done because who are they going to pass it to? That's it. They do call for reinforcements, understandably. And then they start looking further into the house. This house is a mess. It is. And there's actually a lot of pictures of the actual house because we'll talk about it later. But later, investigators and reporters were allowed to go in and take pictures.
Oh my
which
God,
I
what is
thought,
it, a house of horrors?
Basically, actually, that's what they called it. So,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That reminds me of that French morgue where people would go. That would be where they would go just for fun and take pictures with bodies.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would display the bodies in this morgue and you could just go. They sold tickets or something.
Yeah.
Anyways,
No worries.
I digress.
You
but
would
that
not.
is-
You would not be seeing full bodies here. We'll just start with that. So the house is a mess. It is. Think hoarders, right? There's stuff piled everywhere, and it's very dirty, very dusty. Literally has never been cleaned.
Well, and you have dead bodies hanging from your beams.
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
That's
Yep.
very
And
messy.
he's living alone now, right?
He is alone. Yep. So it's just him, and so they go into the regular kitchen, and it's just there's stuff piled everywhere. There's trash everywhere. There's gross things, and interestingly, that it definitely hadn't been maintained, but that's in stark contrast to how it was when Augusta was running the house. Everything
Tight
was neat as a pin, very clean. But there's dead animals everywhere. It's just disgusting.
the
But that's
smell
not
in
the
that
worst.
house.
Oh, I
Oh,
can't.
the smell is probably worse than what I'm experiencing from my dog's blood right now, which is foul.
No, I don't know.
She's just setting the scene for you.
She really is.
She
I
wants
smell-o-vision. Smell-o-vision, yes.
She wants to just really color your perception of the
I
story
am
that's being told.
I'm colored.
Well, perhaps you want to get yourself a bowl of soup because that's what they saw out on the on one of the tables in the kitchen, and they look a little closer, and the bowl is half of a human skull.
Like the bowl, instead of it being made of like
Ceramic?
Yeah.
Okay, a bowl things. It's made of skull.
I'm sorry, was there actually soup in
Yes.
it? Oh no.
Yeah.
I mean, using the whole animal, right?
Yeah.
If he's a
Although,
hunter.
I say that, but like, did he plug the eye holes? I mean, like, there's
It's a very shallow bowl.
Unless it was like the back of the skull.
oh, maybe.
So
they
that,
did
like,
not
the eye
specify
hole-
which half. I don't actually know how they knew it was a skull, but I guess you know. So so at this point they're like, all right, we need electricity. We need lights. So they get, a big generator. They put the lights on. I think they probably regret that, because here are some of the other things that they see.
Oh no.
I'll take a sip.
Yeah, let's take a sip. Silverware made from bones. A belt made from nipples.
No. What?
A lampshade made of human skin.
Wait, how many nipples?
It didn't
How many
specify.
people
a
did
lot.
he
It's a lot of
kill?
nipples. It's a lot of nipples.
A lot of nipples. Well,
Think
there's
of-
2 per person. So
Some people may have 3,
See,
not
that's
me.
true.
But some people
yeah,
may
maybe
have
he got
3.
lucky.
Wow.
Like all the way. I need to know more. All
it
the
was
way
unclear.
around.
Yeah, I think so. It could.
Can we
I mean,
Google?
It said,
Like, does
yeah.
Google
I
have images
think-
of the nipple
Yeah,
belt?
I was also wondering like what Instagram's policy is on belt nipples. Like, are you allowed to post this? I don't.
We're
There's a
gonna
lot of
find
pictures of a
out.
lot
I
of
don't
things.
know.
So
I think we're gonna have to do like the graphic content ahead
Seriously.
for his photos.
Yeah.
Oh, there is a picture of the nipple belt, and it
Oh.
looks exactly as I imagined in my
Oh.
mind's eye.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, you can get excited.
I'm
guys.
scarred.
Okay.
I'm scarred.
Holy shit! I just found it. Woo!
I'm scarred.
Yeah.
You don't come back from that.
No. Well, Okay.
Imagine the
Oh
texture
my god,
of
is
that.
this the soup bowl? Hold on.
Oh, did you find it? Can we figure out which half?
Yes.
Okay.
It's, don't know how, guys. It is the front half of the skull.
Oh. Okay. Not holding a lot of soup, I guess.
Nope. But look, the silverware too, though.
Okay.
He's got his little.
We're gonna post these
Okay.
on the
Yeah.
Instagram because we're all
Yes.
pretty pretty excited about
We'll
these
see if you can find
horrific
this
photos.
one. So the next one is a shade pull. So the little things you pull.
Yeah.
Was decorated with a pair of woman's lips.
Okay.
Sorry,
They
He
were
really
just
is
laugh.
he's using the whole body though.
it
You
was
got
a hobby. It was
skull
a hobby.
nipples.
I did tell you he harvested
Was
for
he
his
a
hobbies.
hunter? Did you mention if he was a hunter as well?
I think everyone in that town, but I
Okay.
don't think they did a lot with hunting. But they did have a farm, so they were allowed.
I think with the farming too, they probably use all the body parts. Wow.
So to that end, he also had no fewer than 4 chairs made with human skin, and a box of 4 human noses, just in case you need an extra.
just couldn't find the right nose, like the right
Yeah.
ridge and slope.
Yeah.
He just had to keep going.
You have questions.
Are you going to tell us how many? Do they know how many people he killed? Because I thought it was like maybe just this one woman, but you cannot make
I will
a
get to
nipple
that.
belt.
Yeah, I
out
will
of
get to
the
that.
nipples of one woman.
No, you need at least 2.
1,000.
I will get to that part.
Okay.
So those are just some of the items. However, many of these items were also clearly meant to be worn. So that included gloves made from a corpse's hands. This one really, for some reason, the words, it just really upset me. Leggings made from human leg skin. Leggings are just sacred to me.
Made
God, so
with real
it's-
skin.
Yeah.
Is he like degloving these people
Yes.
of their skin?
Yes.
And is it sewn or is he just taking it off? Is he like sewing garments from them?
Yes, he is. The next one, speaking of garments, is a vest made from the top part of a woman's body. Wearable.
That's
vest.
not in season. That's not in season.
know, the 90s are
That
coming
is
back,
not
so.
on the cover of Vogue.
Not this one.
Wow.
And then he also had a collection of human face masks, which of
Casual.
course,
That's casual.
yeah, a collection of them, which of course had no eyes. However, the hair was still attached to the scalp.
Oh God! And it's all that it looks like the Crypt Keeper, right? Like it's all like scraggly and dead. And
I will say he took very good care of them. So he did put lipstick. Some had lipstick on them, and he would oil them so that they would retain he would preserve them.
oh, that's really thoughtful of him.
And
he tended to his furs, basically.
They literally, there were some that said he did it. He tanned them just like you would with whatever
tan
Leather.
animal
tan
skin.
stuff.
Animal skin.
Can
Yeah.
you just picture this dude like walking around his house with like someone else's face on, like a woman's chest as a vest? He's got like
And the
his
leggings.
nipple belt,
And the nipple belt
is the
like,
hottest accessory.
The nipple belt.
Oh,
the
maybe it did
leggings.
go up there.
It's like an empire waist.
Yeah.
Do you think he's like wearing his
A-line.
mom's heels, like you know,
for
just,
sure.
like,
Definitely.
rocking it out?
Yeah, definitely. So they said that the faces were so well preserved that they were actually identifiable. And that is how they identified the face of Mary Hogan, the owner of the tavern that had mysteriously disappeared 3 years earlier.
Oh, Mary, we knew you were in his house.
Yep. Yep. So while these poor officers, which honestly they probably never slept again in their lives, well, they're discovering literally a real life horror movie. Ed was brought about 20 miles away to the town of Watoma to be questioned.
In Washington, correct?
Doesn't that sound like it should be in Washington?
Watoma, Washington.
Watoma,
Yeah,
Washington.
okay. It's not Wisconsin, to be clear, just in case we're confusing anyone. Aside from his original story, when they first picked him up, he has not talked. It's now Sunday morning, and the local paper comes out, and now people in Plainfield are finding out what happened. They knew, of course, it's a very small town. Everyone knows everyone. So they knew something had happened. But now the details are starting to come out. And everyone is like, Ed Gein. He's like 140 pounds, soaking wet. And he's very, like I said, very effeminate, very like, meek. They described him as.
You're folding over
I am.
on yourself as
Yeah,
you tell
I just
him. So I
imagine.
just like a
He needs to
small-
shrink down to wear his vest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it might have fit well. That's actually interesting. Yeah. Anyway.
What size woman?
they were slightly bigger, so that actually makes a lot of sense now that
Yeah.
I'm saying that. So they fit, was that, what size was that? Like a 14? Or like,
Size are your skin leggings? I need at least a 12.
are they
thank you.
stretch? Oh. I was just going down the path of like not having to shave your legs.
But you do have
Just
to
one time you have to
Just
shave your
once.
legs, and then you have to shave the skin off.
yeah. Oh, okay. So people are just like, I don't believe it, but not much else happens Sunday. Monday, finally, Ed talks. He says he can only remember going in to get the antifreeze at the hardware store, and Bernice was talking about deer hunting, but then his next memory is loading her body into the hardware store's truck.
Oh, so he's going with I blacked out.
Yep, and that's what he
Convenient.
says. Yep. He says he drove the truck a few miles out of town and parks it hidden away, like in pine trees, walks back to town and drives his car to swap the body into it from the truck. And then at that point, he took the cash register. They didn't say much about why he did. I suspect like maybe in a twisted way, he wanted it to seem like a robbery or
I
something.
was wondering,
Yeah.
yeah, to
'Cause
make
he
it
didn't
look like a
want it.
motive for.
They said he really didn't want for much except for human skin, but he really didn't. He didn't eat much. He didn't like do anything. His handyman jobs were enough to like pay. He didn't have an electric bill, so he just
I mean, you
didn't
got to
need
pay for all
much.
those candles, though.
Yeah, true.
It's got to be a decent.
Yeah.
He didn't. Did
Unless
he
he's burning
eat
the fat of
any-
humans.
No, there was a lot of suspicion because I think that just like was the natural question because he would cook parts of it, but not to eat.
For
it was like to
preservation?
preserve. Yeah, it was like to preserve it. So people were confused about that. Understandably confused about this entire thing, but no, he didn't actually consume anything. And like I said, none of it was sexual. That was not the side of things, thankfully. I'm not sure if that makes it much better, but and he says he brought Bernice, and he keeps saying it in this. Like he's definitely not thinking of her as a person. It's the body, very
His new
impersonal.
lampshade.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you say her when you talk about your lamp? No. So
I do when I talk about my purse.
That's true.
She's also
She has
leather.
her
She's
name.
a beaut.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
leather too.
that's true.
She's not made of human skin
That's
for any
good. We should
listeners.
be very clear about that. That you know of. So yeah, he's in a daze, and when he brings her back to the shed, he hangs it up as he says, but he just like thinks it's a deer is what he says, because he's in a haze.
With the way he's talking about her, that's what I was thinking. So when we were speculating, like, did he himself hunt? He at least grew up around hunters. So if he blacked out, he just found like a deer in his car and went home and treated it like you would treat a deer.
Well, also interestingly, he would go around saying to people that he didn't like the sight of blood and that he didn't want to like do any of it, except that he had grown up in a meat and grocery store and then was on a farm where he had to deal with all this and just, you know, none of it really added up. So I don't know.
Sure spends a lot of time around blood for someone who doesn't
Well,
like
that's
blood.
no. He preserves the skin, so he gets rid of the blood quickly because he doesn't like
That
it.
is
And then
true.
he preserves.
That's a
So
good
maybe
point.
it is true.
So it's like a means to an end. Like you gotta
Yeah.
make a little bit of a mess, but then he's just like, whatever, I don't need this red
Now he has
stuff.
this beautiful lampshade for the rest
Exactly.
of eternity,
Or a lamp pole, shade pole.
made out of
Yeah.
lips.
Yep. Ugh. Yes. Yep. So when I guess I kind of put this in here to describe. So there was a great book that I did end up reading called Deviant. I just want to give it credit by Howard Schechter. And it was way more detailed than what I had. He had a lot of like the full autopsy reports, a ton of interesting information. Just shout out to that. Anyway, so he admits to killing Bernice, but we just have all of these body parts in the house. Like, how many people, your question earlier, how many people has he murdered? So they ask him about this, and he says, well, no one, which is also partially a lie because he did murder Mary. But he says, no, I didn't get these from murdering people. And they're like,
How'd he get them?
okay.
He's like, I just stumbled upon these dead bodies on my farm.
A big
Yeah.
box of nipples.
2 for 1. But so he says that he got them from the graveyard
Oh, no.
in town.
Oh no!
So Ed admits that starting in 1947, which was a couple years after his mother died, he begins going regularly to the local cemetery to dig up bodies. And actually, the police
Ed.
originally didn't believe this because, so apparently, the ground in Wisconsin in this area is really sandy, which you would think is like, oh, that's really easy to dig. But that means they usually, they would often put concrete around and like solidify it so it doesn't cave in and everything. And the body parts in Ed's house weren't decomposed for the most part. They were in decent shape. And so when they asked him about that, he said that he knew that they were going to put it in concrete, which I guess they don't do the same day. And so he would read the obituaries every day. And when someone would die, he would go and that night dig them up when it was all fresh and easy to dig.
Was he taking their whole body or just pieces?
It depends what he was in the mood for.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes, so again, the town is still like, I don't know if that's true. And, you know, that's like, they have to figure out, do we need to go figure out if he murdered a bunch of people or is this true? So after a lot of debate, because obviously this was upsetting, the town finally exhumed a couple of graves to see if this is true. The first was Eleanor Adams, who had died in 1951. Her coffin was empty.
Oh boy.
So can you imagine? They're like, because again, this is drawn out. They didn't do this all the same day. This is after months of debate back on this. And they finally go to the graveyard and they're digging it up. Like, how creepy that would be to like, I just imagine like opening the like,
There's just nothing.
Well, like
coffin and there's
it's
nothing.
extra creepy if you find something, and it's extra creepy to find nothing because
Yeah.
now you know that his story is true.
Exactly. So they did one other one, and that was Mabel Everson, who also died in 1951. And in there, they found a jaw, a section of skull, and part of a leg. And they decided that was enough to confirm Ed's story, that's where these all came from, was the graves.
We know where her nipples are.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah. And part of legs. So I guess she wasn't the leggings.
Yeah, she definitely was
Yeah.
not fit for leggings.
Yeah, it just no. But so just like us, they were so focused on the atrocities and the just insanity of this story that no one really talked about the motive. No one was really asking, why did he do this? Why did he kill Bernice and Mary? And why did he rob the graves? And it was actually one of the many newspaper articles that finally noticed every single one of his victims, either the two that he had killed or that he had gone into the graves, all of them resembled his mother. They were all in their like late 50s, same dark hair, same shape, just all very much like his mother.
That's what I was wondering. Like, if you're gonna rob graves, like that's, yeah, I'm sure you get some sort of a rush from doing that, but it's relatively low risk compared to murdering somebody in broad daylight. It just seems like it'd be a little bit easier to harvest from the graves. Like, was there anything more to why he killed the two specific women that he did?
No, it's just that they, well,
opportunity.
actually not entirely. It was opportunity because there's also not that many people in town. But it's also that remember his mother had been putting in his head that everyone was sinful and all this. And I guess Mary, like, she owned a tavern, so she probably swore and like drank beer and
he was saving them.
He just, or punishing them, I think was more the direction. And that's where you don't feel bad for him because it's really messed up. But it's also like he started the grave robbing in 1947, which is 10 years before he actually killed anyone, or close to 10 years. And I think he started with that, and then I think it escalated. And it, so they did question him about this, and he says, yep, he was obsessed with his mother, loved his mother, and that he kind of simultaneously wanted to recreate her and be her, because he idolized her. So that's why he's looking for all these parts.
Vests and the leggings.
Because he would put them all on and walk around
himself.
And basically. Yep. And again, none of this is sexual. It's just, he just wants to be her. I think there's a lot, I didn't go too deep into this, but he had a lot of confusion about his sexuality and his gender early on and throughout his life, for probably a variety of reasons. But I think that all filters into this too.
Society was very understanding in the late 1800s,
seriously.
1900s. So I can imagine that
he had
went
a lot
well for him.
Yeah. So this was his happy place, was in his home that he kept. And again, he said he kind of started innocently and then ended up, which innocently in quotes, he was not remorseful when they were talking about this, but they said it didn't seem like he really understood the gravity of what he was talking about. He just was very factual, and like, he wasn't, a quote unquote typical serial killer. He just wanted to recreate his mother. And
they weren't using their body parts. Who did any harm?
That's kind of how he thought. Yeah. So he's describing that he would, as I said, put all these items on, and that it was during this description that he said he was actually hungry. And so he asked for an piece of apple pie with a slice of cheddar on it. And that makes him a psychopath, in my opinion.
I was literally going to say the same thing.
Wait,
Why?
isn't that a Wisconsin thing though? Like,
is it?
Cheese? Yeah, I think it's a Wisconsin
It is
thing.
a Washington thing.
Yeah, Washington, Wisconsin.
Well, apples come from Washington.
There you go. Oh, there you go.
I don't know. In my head, they do. I don't know. Okay, actually, grim fact: apples come from Washington, guys.
So we live in the Northeast, if you couldn't tell. That's all we know.
Which actually a bunch of apples come from the Northeast.
Yeah, they weren't our apples.
We live in Apple Valley.
We do live in Apple Valley.
So there you go. Anyway, so I said he's a psychopath. Now the question is, does the law find him insane too? So he finally had his hearing, and at his preliminary hearing, that was just a few days after he had finally confessed, Ed enters a plea. It's super quick. The judge reads the charge, and Ed enters the plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Goes back to wait for his arraignment. He comes for his arraignment, and he was formally charged for first-degree murder and armed robbery, which I included the point about the cash register, because when I read this, I had skimmed over it. I was like, armed robbery? Did I miss something in this? But I think it's because they were able to use that and had proof, I guess, of the cash register having been stolen.
So basically, they're just throwing the book at him, because
Yes.
I think the cash register had nothing to do with it. But they're
Absolutely
like,
not.
let's just throw everything that fits statutorily and hope all of it
Yep.
sticks and he goes to jail forever.
Exactly. Or an insane asylum, because they definitely thought he was insane.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah. And I really hate the phrase guilty by reason of insanity. It makes me think of every horror movie ever. And just like really creepy, scary people. But so they enter this plea, and the first charge I think was just for Bernice. I'm not sure why they did it separately, but they just did the first degree murder of Bernice and the armed robbery for this. And then they were going to get to Mary later. But either way, when he submitted the plea, his lawyer recommended that he go for a sanity test before the trial. And so the judge agreed and sent him to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. And that was just in the same state, just like 70 miles away, to be observed for 30 days. He was there from November 25th to December 22nd, and they determined he was a pseudoneurotic schizophrenic. And I think, for me at least, I thought when I think of schizophrenia, I think of split personality and all that, but that wasn't really what he did. It was much more hallucinations and delusions and that side of things.
Yeah, when I think schizophrenia, I think of like people seeing the walls bleed and
Yeah.
like people talking
Yeah.
to them.
What you're thinking of is like dissociative identity
Yeah.
disorder or multiple
Yep.
personality, which I think often gets confused with schizophrenia.
Yep.
I actually follow a kid on TikTok who talks about his schizophrenia hallucinations,
Interesting.
and he like draws the faces he sees. I'll have to find what his handle
Yeah.
is because I
Yeah.
was absolutely fascinated
That's
by
super
this.
That is
interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah. So, and I think that was a common, especially in the 50s, they did not understand any of this. So, but either way, their opinion was that he was legally insane and not competent to stand trial. So they recommended that he be committed to the hospital, and the judge had to order it. So he determined him insane and recommitted him to the Central State Hospital for an indeterminate time of commitment, which I found interesting. I didn't know you could basically just send him away and say,
TBD.
you're insane. Yep.
Yeah, which a lot of people think if someone's going to get away with it by reason of insanity, they think, oh, like they got off and now they're going to be in this cushy prison. But I know at least in Connecticut, like it is no picnic at
No.
all. And like only the people who really deserve to be there end up there. And you can actually end up there longer than you would even have a
Yeah.
prison sentence
Yes.
if they determine that you're still a threat to yourself or society.
Well,
So
exactly. I mean, he there's no timeline on this, just
Yeah.
until we say so.
Right.
And they would monitor him every 6 months, and just he lived there. And I mean, I don't think it was a picnic. I don't think it's a picnic now, but I don't think it was a picnic in the 50s. I think that it was. I think they were doing like lobotomies, and I'm making.
there's
I have
there's
no
lots
proof
of
that,
movies.
but
There's lots
yeah.
of movies and shows on that.
Yes, yeah. Which is also what I think of when I think of like not guilty by reason of insanity. I don't know. Creeps me out. Makes me think of all those.
I know. Actually, that's probably like 1950s is probably
Mm-hmm.
when all of the like state-run asylums and everything were a big thing, and most of
Mm-hmm.
all those places got shut down because they were overfilled and overrun, and there was neglect and abuse, and
Yeah.
nobody
Yeah.
was getting better. That's for sure.
Yeah. So so he's there, and TBD. So we'll pause on that. And
I was gonna say, is he still alive?
no, but
Okay.
he was also born in 1906.
I mean, fair.
So remember his parents, his dad died in the wagon, Oregon Trail, you know.
Okay, so that would make him carry the two. That'd make him real old.
So yeah, he's not a centurion or whatever that is. No.
You sort of forget the time, like
I
when
know.
you're telling the story. I'm so engrossed in the story,
I
like
know.
I forgot like the main fact that he was born. Really,
That's why I wrote
a long time
my
ago.
quick reference timeline, because
Okay.
it is. I did forget, and I like to know like relative to when things happened to what years. So similar to other cases we've talked about, now everyone's noticing Ed's weird behavior, except that Ed definitely was really weird to begin with. Because remember how we said before, like, oh, they like breathe deeply every day, and that's why they're a serial killer. You know, they look back on things and find reason where there wasn't. But Ed really, he was very weird, and very obvious. So in one case, remember our friend Elmo, the same guy who was hunting deer on Ed's land, he was talking to him about Mary, the tavern owner, and said something about Ed, about Mary missing. And apparently Ed said, "Oh, she's not missing. She's down at the house now." And Elmo just didn't think anything of it because Ed was just always saying weird shit. So that's fine. Except he made this joke a lot, saying she's at the farm now, or I took her in her pickup truck and brought her home.
Isn't that so? Like, how did that not?
Yep.
Raise alarms enough to be like, hey, so you know that missing tavern owner? So they keep saying that he's at.
But that
she's
must have
at
been,
his
he
house.
must have just been so strange. Because again, just because he was talking to Elmo, like the people he talked to were not people that he was close friends with. Everyone thought he was weird. He was very isolated. So I just think he was unbelievably weird. And that's what, I don't know. It's crazy. So I thought that was interesting. But overall, given how insane this is, it's a media frenzy in this town. Now, remember, this town is 900 people. It's in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. And it's just, they people live there because they want the quiet. They want to be isolated. And honestly, it would have been crazy if you heard about a nipple belt today. That would definitely be all over the news. But this
Yeah.
is the 50s. Like, this kind of thing was not, there weren't serial killers, there weren't crazy things like this. So
Well, plus in the 50s, weren't women still like very modest and you're wearing like dresses and
yeah,
like
the
Susie
actual
Homemaker,
content
so
was,
that's
definitely
horrific.
Definitely. So they're talking about all this even amongst the town because they, of course, knew that Bernice and Mary had been murdered, and they knew that there were all these other body parts, but they didn't know how many. Because at this point, while the media is just going crazy, they hadn't exhumed the graves yet, so they're still like wondering where these body parts came from. And I guess before, maybe 10 or 20 years before all this happened, there were a lot of murders and a lot of bad things that happened in the town that originally everyone thought, oh my God, it must have been Ed. But they were like children gone missing and men gone missing. And it's
really his
just not
MO.
his MO. So ultimately they had proven that was not from him, but this is just adding to the insanity. Like they're all saying, I don't even know if they would have termed it a serial killer at this point, but they're all saying, all these crazy things. And this is catching all the attention of, national news, as you can imagine. And people were quite upset at the attention. There were all these investigators and reporters there. And this kind of all culminated in the auction of Ed's property and personal belongings. To be very clear, they were not auctioning any lamps or chairs.
Because that was my initial
It was going to be how much did that nibble
Yeah.
go for?
Yeah. It's priceless.
price. Oh my! I was just gonna say the exact same thing.
It's okay, guys. I'll settle for the lampshade. It's fine.
Yep. So they did want, because I guess I never really thought about this, but what would happen to somebody's things? He had no children. There was no surviving family. So what would happen to all these things? And I guess they just auction them.
Yeah.
So the auction was scheduled for Sunday, March 30th in 1958. And I literally wrote, obviously not including the body parts, but did include that.
It wasn't obvious because that was my first thought.
That's true. Okay, I'm glad I specified. Well, and it's also, they did include the 1949 Ford sedan in which he had moved Bernice's body. Which
Okay.
It's not evidence. Like,
I guess not. I guess they
Well,
were
I mean,
content.
I think they get rid of evidence eventually, right?
Yeah.
they give it back to you?
I don't know.
Well, I guess to the estate.
Yeah, so I don't know. But people were mad because that was Palm Sunday, first of all. And so people were going to be able to look everything over the week before, kind of see what there was. And so a flyer went out announcing all this, and people were additionally upset when this flyer came out because they were charging 50 cents a person to go look at and like survey all the stuff before the auction.
It's like a circus.
Exactly. And, so and it ended up that the judge was like, you can't do that. So they didn't. But people were still really upset. But before any of this could actually happen, on March 20th at 2:30 in the morning, the closest neighbor to the Gein farm saw a bunch of flames, saw the farm starting to burn. By the time, so this is again why I question the marshland fire, because by the time they actually got everybody there, had notified people, got somebody there to fight the fire, the whole house had burnt down.
That's probably for the best.
Yes. And I also wondered, they were probably like, oh, I guess I'll put my shoe on now. And, they probably weren't running to go put the fire
Right.
out. And interestingly, the fire marshal at the time was Frank Warden, which is Bernice's son. So he was probably like, I think I'll just sit here and not go fight this fire.
If the town, and if the town was
Yeah.
upset about everything,
Totally.
that makes sense.
So obviously everyone thought this was a little suspicious, but I guess there was no evidence found and the investigation fizzled out. Oh, darn. So they kind of just said, no great loss. And in fact, when Ed was told all this, he just said, just as well. So, which is very strange. Because something else I didn't mention earlier about the house when they found it. So there's outdoor summer kitchen thing with terrible things. There's his real kitchen with terrible things, and his bedroom with also terrible things. But the rest of the house had been boarded up and was maintained completely untouched from when Augusta died. So he had just only kept these little tiny places to live, and the rest of the house was like a museum.
Maybe it's because he couldn't dig up enough bodies to decorate the entire house
That's
with human flesh,
true.
so he wanted to just focus his efforts on a few choice
fair.
rooms.
That's fair.
Honestly, I could take a page from his book. Like, I try to tackle
Which page? Which page?
the home decor page, where he's just very focused on one room at a time. I tend to go for all the projects at once. So good on you, Ed.
Yeah, we can all learn a little.
Just kidding.
So you would think that would be the end of the auction, everything burned, but it didn't, because they had taken everything out to inventory it. So they still had the auction on that day, which you got to feel bad for the town who just wanted to live their little life. They just, and then this terrible thing happens. They get all this attention and then they still have to deal with all of this. 2,000 people showed up to this auction. Remember, the town has 900 people.
I would have gone.
Well, so I think that's how most people felt.
I would have bought something.
Yeah. It's interesting that you could buy anything, but I mean, most of the people, honestly, that ended up buying stuff were buying it to scrap it. So they bought like the iron stove and like a plow and things like that. The land was sold to a developer for only $3,800, which in today's dollars is like $40K. Which I thought 195 acres. I guess it's in the middle of nowhere, but
Still feels like a bargain.
yeah. I mean,
It does sound like a bargain, but again, that's Wisconsin. Like, we don't have open spaces in
True.
Connecticut. They develop on
True.
a 2 by 2 inch piece of land.
exactly.
So,
Can you imagine what 195 acres would go for now? No. There was, however, a bidding war on the 1949 maroon Ford, which had carried Bernice's body. It ended up being sold for $760, or about $8,000 now, to a sideshow exhibitor who put, get this, bloodied wax figures in it to like recreate it, and of course would charge people. It ended up, he would do it kind of semi-locally in like county fairs. It ended up being, the fairs wouldn't let him show it, and he ended up, I think, like scrapping it, but really awful. And anyway,
I think it's kind of fascinating. I guess that's sort of why I'm enjoying this podcast.
I was going to say,
but,
that's
like,
why we're here.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I also needed to look up how much that land would go for today. So I found a listing for 172 acres in Tigerton? I don't know. Somewhere in Wisconsin, and it is $1.25 million.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Jeez.
But that might
Yeah.
be a fancier part of Wisconsin.
I literally see a hunting camera with a deer on it, so I feel like I'm in the right neck of the woods.
Yes. I did spend quite a bit of time on Google Maps, like looking up this space, and it's really creepy. So the house had burned down. They didn't obviously rebuild there. And it's like, you can look up exactly what intersection it's on. And I don't know, it just gives me the chills to just think about going there, and just, I don't know, it was really creepy to look at.
I did find some bargains, guys. I found one for under $300,000 for 120 acres. Let's go.
Still, this was only,
it was a bargain. So it was still a
definitely,
bargain.
because this was only, I did it in today's dollars, only 40K. So like, that's, that's a lot. So you had mentioned earlier about some of the asylums and hospitals not being great, but Ed was actually enjoying his time there.
Of course he was.
Well, because so it also kind of makes sense, because he had now electricity and plumbing and just kind of lived his day reading and
Modern luxury.
Yep. And the townspeople were actually kind of upset about that too, because they're like, he's like living in luxury versus his little hoarder's house here. And but anyway, he generally, like I said, continued reading and was fine. And the nurses said he was creepy with his eye and his half smile, and but that you wouldn't actually think he was crazy. Well, it turns out his doctors thought that too. So remember I said they check in with him every 6 months or so? In 1968, so 10 years after he had been deemed insane and committed to the hospital, they checked in and said at this time he was not legally insane. He was clinically insane. So in other words, he was fit to stand trial, but that either way he would end up back in the hospital. So this upset people too, that they were talking about all this, because it was kind of like, all right, he's going to end up in the same spot. It's not solving anything. We already know kind of what happened, but nonetheless, they started the proceedings in 1968 in January. There was a lot of back and forth and paperwork and filibustering. That the actual trial didn't start until November of that year. And this one was interesting. It was a split trial, first for the first-degree murder of Bernice, and then if he was guilty, they'd hold a second trial to determine if he was sane at the time of the killing. So they first had to figure out, after monitoring him in the hospital for 10 years, that he was fit to stand trial. And then they had to figure out, was he insane at the time of the killing? So only a week later in the same year, so 1968, Ed was found guilty, of course, of the first degree murder of Bernice. And then the second phase of the trial was like later that day, another couple hours, where they found him that he was insane at the time of the murder. So he was therefore not guilty by reason of insanity. So all within the same day, he went from being guilty to not guilty, and he ended up back in the hospital. So this is why people are like, what?
What a waste of taxpayer
Yeah,
dollars.
it sounds like
Come
a
on,
waste of
Wisconsin.
Completely. I don't know. I really don't know what they gained from it, because he had already confessed what he was going to confess. They already were satisfied that he had not killed additional people. They knew, I think I didn't read all the names, but I think they were able to identify everybody that he harvested from. And so I don't really know why.
Maybe they thought that he wasn't going to come up as insane at the time of the crime.
That's what I was wondering.
They would get the conviction.
They were
going
to try to catch him and like fabricating like the degree to which he was insane or something like that. Like they wanted to see if his story would change 10 years later.
Yeah, I don't know, but no, back to the hospital he went, and he did in 1974 try to petition. He basically said, "I'm fine. I should be released." That's it. That's all the petition said. And they had to review it. To their credit, they reviewed it, but naturally it was rejected. He remained in the hospital.
That's often how thoughtful inmate writings are. I'm innocent.
Yeah, please let me out. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, bye.
And but in 1978, so you'd mentioned a lot of these places were turned into correctional facilities. So that is what happened to Central State. And so Ed was sent to Mendota Mental Health Institute in Madison. And it was there that he died at the age of 78 from lung cancer. So a little bit of karma there on July 26, 1984. And I did write here, it's crazy that he had parents that married in 1899 because 1984 is not that long ago. No. Right?
But it is now, guys.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he was buried next to his mother in the same Plainfield cemetery that he had stolen from 30 years before. And Bernice was buried 50 yards from that. So it's all comes back to Plainfield.
Somebody should have dug up his body, taken his nipples.
I was honestly just thinking that, like, can we go get his lips?
Well, you want to talk about karma? I mean, that would be...
No, but they did actually have a lot of trouble with people, because this was so sensational. Even, we'll talk about pop culture in a second, but it was so sensational that people would come and chip off pieces of his headstone, and eventually somebody stole it. So there isn't one. There was actually a show, one of the shows I watched in preparation for this, not realizing even though the name of it was paranormal, but they went and there's a lot of belief that everything was haunted, even when Ed was young, probably because it was such a creepy house. And then once he was a little older and keeping body parts, they all thought it was haunted. But yeah, so the people would steal the headstone and all that. But this did draw a whole lot of attention. One of the people was Robert Bloch, who had written the fictional horror book Yours Truly, Jack the Ripper. He came to Plainfield to learn more and eventually wrote Hitchcock's Psycho. And that was based, Norman Bates, so the quote I started this episode with, was based on Ed. And in fact, the three personalities of Norman Bates were from the fact that the newspapers called Ed split personality. So they thought, like I did, and that was a rumor that had gone out, and that's why Norman Bates has the three personalities in Psycho. In reality, Ed was suffering from the hallucinations and delusions. Psycho, as you may know, is often regarded as the blueprint for a horror movie with a psychotic killer. And indeed, Tobe Hooper, who had heard as a child about Ed Gein, he used those stories to create the 1974 movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, that's immediately what I pictured with the faces made out of skin, is like that horrifying face. Which, by the way, this is a fun fact about me. This is a grim fact about me. I could win an Olympic race if you put a man with a chainsaw behind me. Something about the revving of a chainsaw. Like, I could be on a casual walk and someone goes to trim their hedges and I nope the fuck out of there. Like, I was in a haunted house once and they opened the door and the guy had a chainsaw. I took my friend, shoved her into him, and took off running like a majestic gazelle. The guy with the chainsaw chased after me. I was laughing so hard I thought I was going to fall and break my teeth.
Did you get hiccups?
No, but my friend had completely emptied her bladder on her pants because she got scared when I pushed her into him. So we drove home with her sitting on a garbage bag in my car. But that's the chainsaws.
I was not that friend that time, but I have been to haunted places with you, and I can confirm that this is what happens. I always go in front.
I mount people in haunted houses. I love them. Can't get enough of them.
Horrified of them.
I'm the worst person for a haunted house because I just walk and don't react. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is awesome.
Yep.
And they're just like, you're no fun. Bye. Going for Marina.
Yes, I am very gazelle-like when there's a chainsaw behind me. Yes.
So no chainsaws around
chainsaws.
here.
No chainsaws.
I'm surprised you also didn't think of Buffalo Bill from Silence of the
Oh my
Lambs.
God, I've been thinking of him
Yes.
the whole time. I'm sitting here like, don't say it puts the lotion on
Yeah.
its skin.
So,
Don't say it.
I was debating which quote to start with, and I thought it better. I don't know, because Ed's personality is really like, it's the two things. It's his mother obsession, and then it's also the skin obsession. But I thought the mother won out, so that's why I went with that. But yes, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs was also so good.
Chianti and fava beans.
Yes. Yeah, which was also what I wanted to name the podcast. That was one of the iterations of it. Yeah, so that was based on Geen. So I was surprised reading this because I came across this case just looking at like best cases to read, and I couldn't believe, because Silence of the Lambs is one of my favorite movies, which is why we're doing this podcast.
That's casual.
And
normal.
I just didn't realize that it was all based on, I mean, obviously there's plenty that's not true, but based on a real life. I definitely didn't know anything about Ed. But yeah, that was the story of Ed Gein. And it's awful for that town. It's awful, obviously, for Ed, for the women who were murdered, for the people who were abused after death. Like, that just terrible all around. But that's the case.
That is quite the story. And I
Yeah.
just have to say that could have been, you could have gotten to the end of that and been like, and it was completely made up. And I would be like, yeah, that makes sense. People
Yep.
like lampshades made out of human
Yeah.
flesh. Yeah, how could that be real?
And they're all like consistent reports. So I mentioned earlier, like those reporters like got to go in the house after. So there are pictures. Again, Colby found some of them. There are pictures of these things. They're not just folklore. It
Yeah,
really
we'll put
happened.
some on the Instagram, but maybe
Yeah,
just
maybe not all
Google
of them.
them yourself.
Just look it up,
and
guys.
Yeah.
And don't come for us when you look at it and you're not pleased with
No.
what you see.
I will also say I prepared. I knew this was going to be a tough listen. So there was a lot of dark humor that came out of such a famous case. So people, I guess, particularly in like the 60s, would make a lot of jokes. We can determine how many of these we want to keep in, but I have to.
I'm so excited.
Why did they have to keep the heat on in Ed Gein's house? So the furniture wouldn't get goosebumps? Okay. Why did they let Ed Gein out of jail on New Year's Eve? So he could dig up a date. Ed Gein's cookie jar has lady fingers in it.
Oh no.
And his favorite beer is lots of body but no head. Okay. That's it.
I'm so happy
right.
I drank a beer at the start of this episode.
Those
man.
are great. I think they're all staying in.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed episode 3, a little bit different than the first 2. If you did enjoy it and you want to stay up to date on the next ones, make sure you like and subscribe to us. So you can follow us on Instagram at Grim Crime Podcast. You can email us if it's really hard, guys. You can email us if you have case ideas or just want to say hi at grimcrimepodcast@gmail.com. And for whatever your listening pleasure, make sure you rate us and subscribe and all the things that you do on those platforms that we're learning. But we really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun for us. We hope you're enjoying it too.
Yeah, and just remember, listen, learn, and stay alive.